I've always been a night owl, the kind of person who stays up late, reading or watching shows in the quiet hours. When I moved into my new apartment last year, I didn't expect anything unusual. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I started noticing this faint tapping sound coming from the walls. It was so soft that I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just the house settling or maybe the pipes acting up nothing to lose sleep over, but it didn't stop. The tapping grew more frequent, almost like it was trying to get my attention. I started wondering if it could be an animal trapped somewhere in the walls. That thought was unsettling enough, but then it got weirder. Along with the tapping, I began hearing a soft whisper. It was so faint I couldn't make out any words, but it was there, just barely audible. It didn't sound like any language I knew. One night I decided I'd had enough. I stayed up later than usual, determined to figure out what was sitting. The tapping started again, quicker this time, like it was impatient. Then the whispering got louder. I swear I heard my name in the mix. My chest tightened, and I reached for the nearest light switch, flipping it on in a panic. The room lit up, but the noises stopped immediately. Everything went dead silent, unnaturally so. For a while I sat there, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was just tired, or maybe the building really did have some weird quirks. But before I could fully calm down, it came again, a knock. This time it was louder and more deliberate, coming from the wall right next to my bed. I froze. I could feel the vibrations through the frame of the bed, as if whatever was making the noise was right there on the other side of the wall. My hands shook as I grabbed a flashlight and started inspecting the wall. I didn't see anything unusual at first, but then I noticed the wallpaper. In one spot, it looked like it was peeling back, almost like someone or something was tugging at it from behind. My gut told me to leave it alone, but I ignored the feeling. I moved the furniture out of the way and peeled back the wallpaper. Underneath, there was a small crack in the drywall. It wasn't much, just a few inches wide, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. I leaned in closer, trying to get a better look. That's when I heard a low whisper, so close it felt like someone was standing right next to me. I jerked back, heart pounding. My brain was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation, but I couldn't. The room felt heavy, like the air had thickened, and then I heard it again, only louder this time. It was a voice clear enough to make out the words. It said, "Let me out." My whole body went cold. I stared at the crack, unable to move. The voice sounded desperate, almost pleading. Then the wall shifted. I don't even know how to describe it. It was like something was pushing against the drywall from the other side, trying to force its way through. That's when the scraping started. It was this horrible grating noise, like nails dragging along a chalkboard, but deeper. Then came a growl, low and guttural, echoing through the room. That was it for me. I bolted, leaving everything behind. I didn't even bother closing the door on my way out. I didn't stop running until I was outside in the cool night air. My chest was heaving, and my legs felt like jelly, but at least I was out. I haven't been back since. The landlord says the apartment is under renovation now, but I know that's not the real story. Whatever's in those walls, it's still there. It's waiting. When I moved into that old Victorian house on the edge of town, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. It had everything: the grand staircase, towering windows, intricate moldings. The price? Too good to pass up. The previous owner left in a hurry, said it was for personal reasons. I figured it was just too much house for one person, so I didn't ask too many questions. The first few nights were peaceful. I unpacked, settled in, started enjoying my dream home. Then came the noises. At first it was nothing special, the creaks and groans of an old house. Floors settling, wind rattling the windows, all that stuff. But one evening, while I was reading in the living room, something caught my attention. It started as a faint tapping sound from beneath the floor. Nothing alarming, just enough to make me glance up from my book. But then it got louder. It turned into scratching, like something was clawing to get out. I got up, heart thudding, and moved to the center of the room. As soon as I stepped closer, the noise stopped. Dead silence. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe a raccoon or a rat had found its way into the crawl space. But then, just as I was about to sit back down, I heard it again. Only this time it wasn't scratching. It was a muffled cry. It wasn't an animal. It sounded human, faint, desperate pleading. I bolted upright, trying to process what I was hearing. There was no way someone could be under there. The house had been empty for months before I moved in, but that sound, it was too real to ignore. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord. When he answered, I asked if there was a basement under the house. He sounded calm, said there was a crawl space, just typical for a house like this. When I told him about the noise, he brushed it off, said it was probably the plumbing or an animal. I wanted to believe him, but my gut told me something wasn't right. Over the next few days, the sounds got worse. The scratching was louder, and the whispers started. They were faint at first, like someone mumbling just out of earshot. I couldn't tell where they were coming from, but they seemed to fill the room, making it hard to breathe. One night I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. Grabbing a flashlight, I headed down to the basement. The stairs creaked with every step, and the air down there was thick and musty. In the far corner of the room, I found a wooden trapdoor. I'd noticed it before, but I'd never thought to open it. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the handle. The whispers were louder now, almost like they were urging me forward. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the door open. A cold draft hit me, and I aimed my flashlight down into the dark crawl space. The beam caught a narrow tunnel, just big enough to crawl through. Every instinct told me to close the door and walk away, but I couldn't. Something about those whispers drew me in. I climbed down and started crawling. The dirt was damp and cold, and the smell of rot filled the air. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling of being watched. At the end of the tunnel, there was a small door. It looked old, barely hanging on its hinges. The whispers were deafening now, swirling all around me. I reached out, my hand shaking, and pushed the door open. Inside was a small, cramped space. The walls were covered in old newspaper clippings, all about missing people from the area. In the corner was a figure skeletal and curled up, as if it had been there for years. Its eyes were wide open, staring straight at me. I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my hand. The whispers became a roar, filling my head with a sound I can't even describe. It felt like the room was spinning, like the air itself was trying to crush me. Somehow I managed to crawl back out and slam the trapdoor shut. I didn't stop until I was out of the house, standing in the street, gasping for air. I moved out the next day, left everything behind. I never spoke to the landlord again, never went back to that house. But even now, I can't escape it. At night, in the silence, I still hear the whispers. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see those hollow, staring eyes. There was I didn't want to move into this house, not at first anyway. It was too old, too strange, and the price seemed too good to be true. But then I saw the potential. The sprawling garden, the spacious rooms, and the historic charm. It was exactly what I wanted, or at least what I thought I wanted. I was ready for a fresh start. Little did I know, the house would soon become a nightmare. I should have paid attention to the warning signs. The realtor mentioned, almost offhandedly, that the house had a mysterious history, but I brushed it off. She told me it was an old mansion, built in the 1800s, and that there were rumors of previous owners disappearing without a trace. I assumed it was just one of those urban legends designed to add intrigue to an otherwise normal sale. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first few nights were calm, too calm in fact. The house creaked and groaned with the wind, as any old house would, but I never felt anything out of the ordinary. However, on the third night, I woke up to a strange sound like a low whisper coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind or the pipes. I told myself I was being paranoid. But then, the sound came again, louder this time. It was unmistakable, a voice, faint but clear. I lay still in bed, my heart racing. The voice wasn't just whispering, it was talking, muttering words that I couldn't quite make out. I convinced myself it was a figment of my imagination. But the next night, the sound came back. This time it was accompanied by a strange tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. The sound seemed to come from somewhere deep within the walls, echoing through the house, as if something or someone was trying to get my attention. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I got out of bed and walked through the dark hallway, my footsteps soft on the old floorboards. The house was silent, save for the faint rustling behind the walls. I stood in front of the wall in the living room, where the sound seemed to originate from, my breath catching in my throat. It was an old house, sure, but this felt different. This was unnatural. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to listen. The whispers were clearer now, though still unintelligible. The tapping had stopped, but there was something else feeling. A heavy, suffocating presence that seemed to wrap around me, pulling me into the depths of the house. I knew I had to investigate. I couldn't let this go on. The next day I spent hours searching the house, looking for any signs of hidden rooms or secret passages. I checked every closet, every attic, and every nook and cranny. It wasn't until I moved the large wardrobe in the master bedroom that I found it a door, hidden behind a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. At first I thought it was just another closet, but when I touched the handle, I felt something strange. The air was colder here, as if the door was holding something and something that didn't want to be released. I hesitated for only a moment before I turned the knob and pushed the door open. What I found behind that door sent a chill down my spine. The room was small, barely big enough for me to stand in. It was dark, the only light coming from a small crack in the ceiling where the sunlight barely filtered through. But what truly struck me was the smell. It was damp, musty, like the air hadn't moved in years. The walls were lined with old, yellowed papers, newspaper clippings, photographs, and faded notes all pinned to the walls in a haphazard manner. I stepped inside, my heart thudding in my chest. The room felt wrong, as if it didn't belong in the house at all. The air was thick, almost oppressive, and I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. But some morbid curiosity pulled me further into the room. I turned to look at the wall nearest me. The papers covered almost every inch, but there was one particular spot that caught my eye. A faded photograph of a woman, smiling, her eyes wide with a look of terror. Her face was blurry, as if the photo had been taken in a hurry, but what struck me most was the date on the bottom, October 1923. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I didn't know why, but I felt as though I had seen her face before. A chill ran through my spine, but I couldn't look away. There was something deeply unsettling about her expression. I pulled the photograph from the wall, my fingers trembling as I examined it. As I moved the photo, a small piece of paper fell out from behind it, fluttering to the floor. I picked it up, my heart racing. It was a letter, written in a shaky hand, the ink faded but still legible. They are still here. They know. They're watching. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I had no choice. I had to bring them here. They said they would make me stay. They said they would never let me leave. The letter didn't make any sense. It seemed like the ramblings of a mad person, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was important. Just as I was about to look closer, I heard it again, the tapping. This time it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the floor, directly beneath me. I dropped the letter in horror, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to break through the floorboards. And then I heard the voice again. Help me, I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice sounded so familiar, as if it was calling out to me personally. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air thickening with an oppressive force. I turned and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I could still hear the tapping and the whispering as I fled through the house, but I couldn't stop. I had to leave. I didn't sleep that night. I packed a bag and left the house early the next morning. I never went back. A few weeks later, I learned about the history of the house. The woman in the photo was the last person who had lived there. Her name was Evelyn Miller. She had vanished without a trace, just like the others. No one knew what had happened to her, but the stories were clear. The house had a curse. It was built over an old burial ground, and the restless spirits of the past had taken hold of it, and now it was my turn to bear the consequences. I don't know what happened to Evelyn or the others who vanished. I don't know what the house wanted from me, but I do know one thing: I'll never forget the tapping, the voice, or the feeling of being watched. And sometimes just before I fall asleep, I can still hear the whispering from the walls. I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in a small suburban neighborhood, I always chalked up the strange noises and creaks of old houses to the usual sounds of aging wood and pipes. I'd read horror stories as a kid, of course, but never once thought I'd be the protagonist in one. That changed the day I moved into the old Victorian house at the edge of town. The house was perfect in my eyes, old, charming, and filled with character. It was also incredibly affordable, a fact that had intrigued me enough to overlook the realtor's nervous laughter when she handed over the keys. She'd made a quick exit after the formalities, her eyes darting around nervously as she warned me about the house's quirky history. But again, I wasn't one for superstition. The house had been sitting vacant for years, and all the paperwork checked out, so I moved in, eager to start fresh. The first few days were uneventful. The house felt cold at times, but nothing that couldn't be explained away by drafty windows and an old furnace. Then, on the third night, I started hearing something whispers. At first, I dismissed them. Old houses make sounds, right? But these whispers were different. They didn't sound like the wind. They weren't the normal creaks and groans of settling wood. No, these were distinct voices, faint but undeniably there. I heard them again that night. The voices came from the walls, soft and indistinct, but filled with an urgency that made my skin crawl. It was almost as if the house was speaking to me, pleading with me to understand something. I froze in bed, my ears straining to catch the words. But no matter how hard I listened, I couldn't make sense of it. The next morning I decided to investigate. I assumed it was something mundane, an old water pipe, perhaps, or the air ducts in the walls. But when I searched the house, I couldn't find any logical explanation. The whispers didn't stop, though. They were always there, present in the silence, filling the air with a strange energy that I couldn't shake. One evening, after hearing the whispers grow louder again, I decided to do something drastic. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but something was compelling me to act. I grabbed a flashlight and began poking around the walls, tapping them in different places. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then, I tapped on a section of the wall near the staircase. There was a slight hollow sound, almost as if the wall was thinner in that area. My heart began to race. I ran my fingers over the surface, feeling for any irregularities. The wood was old and worn, but I could feel something just beneath the surface, a small indentation. I pushed harder, and the paneling shifted with a soft groan. I stepped back in shock as the wall parted slightly, revealing a narrow doorway. I hadn't seen this in the house's blueprints. It wasn't listed anywhere. Without thinking, I shoved the door open, and the creaking of hinges filled the otherwise quiet air. A dark, narrow staircase descended into the darkness below. I hesitated for only a moment. The whispers seemed to beckon me, urging me to go down, to find out what was hidden there. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down, the old wood creaking beneath my feet. Each step seemed to bring me further into the unknown, deeper into the heart of the house. The air grew colder as I descended, and I could feel an unnatural chill crawl across my skin. At the bottom of the stairs, the flashlight beam illuminated a small, windowless room. The walls were covered in old, yellowed newspaper clippings, all tacked up haphazardly, along with a series of photographs. The faces in the photographs were blurred, their features indistinct, but there was something unsettling about them. The room smelled musty, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. But it wasn't the room itself that frightened me. It was the whispering. I could hear it clearly now, no longer distant and muffled, but right next to me, as if the voices were coming from within the room itself. I spun around, but there was no one there. No hidden speakers, no devices, just me in the room and the growing sense of dread that crept up on me. I scanned the clippings on the wall, trying to make sense of them. They were all stories, horrific ones. Tales of people disappearing, of strange happenings in the house, of things that had been buried and forgotten. But one particular story caught my eye. The headline read, "The House That Swallowed Its Occupants, A History of Vanishing Residents." My stomach turned as I read the article, which detailed the many people who had lived in the house over the years, only to disappear mysteriously without a trace. The last entry was dated from the 1970s, and it detailed the disappearance of the previous owners, a couple named Sarah and David Harris. The article spoke of strange sounds coming from the walls of the house, whispers that drove the couple to madness before they vanished into thin air. According to the article, the whispers were not just random noises, they were the voices of the house's past occupants, trapped within its walls. As I read the article, I could hear the whispers growing louder, more frantic. They seemed to be calling to me, urging me to listen. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I whirled around, heart pounding in my chest. No one was there. The room was empty. I stood there, trembling, unsure of what to do. The whispers were no longer whispers, they were full voices, screaming, begging. The voices of people long gone, their souls trapped in the walls of the house. I knew I had to leave, but as I turned to go, I felt something else, a pressure on my chest, like an invisible weight. The voices were now loud enough to drown out all other sound. It was as if they were inside my head, filling me with their terror. I stumbled backward up the stairs, my flashlight shaking in my hand. But as I reached the top, I heard a final, chilling whisper. It was clear now, unmistakable. "Don't leave." I slammed the door shut behind me, breathing heavily as I leaned against the wall, trying to calm myself. I didn't know what I had just uncovered, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't stay in that house anymore. That night, I packed my things and left. The whispers followed me, though, echoing in my mind, and even now, I can still hear them. Every time I close my eyes, I hear those voices, trapped in the walls of that house, calling to me, and I know I'll never be able to forget the way they pleaded.